Those who favor a Mesoamerican setting for the Book of Mormon tend to identify either the Grijalva River or the Usumacinta River as the River Sidon. In this short video, we'll see how identifying the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta River as the Sidon elucidates a cycle of warfare and assassination in the Book of Mormon within the context of trade routes and who controls them. The Book of Alma's war for the control over settlements along the East Sea, hereafter called the Melakayite War, and the cycle of assassination and invasion found in the Book of Helaman are episodes in the Book of Mormon where using Mesoamerican archaeology can help us see the world that undergirds Mormon's narrative. As Grant Hardy has noted, Mormon had three competing roles when writing: moralist, historian, and writer. And Mormon's work as historian was often undermined by his attempts at leveraging Nephite history into a morality play. After all, he was a human being and couldn't fill all three roles equally well at the same time. The Amalekite War was started when a failed monarchist, Malachi, fled with his supporters into Lamanite lands. He then used treachery, murder, and deceit to become a Lamanite king. Malachi led a Lamanite invasion into Nephite lands, but rather than attacking the Nephite heartland along the river Sidon, the Lamanites attacked the cities on the eastern borders by the seashore, taking them. Quote, "And it came to pass that the Nephites were not sufficiently strong in the city of Moroni. Therefore Malachi did drive them, slaying many. And it came to pass that Malachi took possession of the city, yea, possession of all their fortifications. And those who fled out of the city of Moroni came to the city of Nephihah, and also the people of the city of Lehi gathered themselves together and made preparations and were ready to receive the Lamanites to battle. And it came to pass that Malachi would not suffer the Lamanites to go against the city of Nephihah to battle, but kept them down by the seashore, leaving men in every city to maintain and defend it. And thus he went on, taking possession of many cities, the city of Nephi, and the city of Lehi, and the city of Morianton, and the city of Omner, and the city of Gid, and the city of Milok, all of which were on the east borders by the seashore." End of quote. As the Nephites gradually retake city after coastal city, Pahoran, the chief judge, is forcibly dethroned by the kingmen. Moroni leads a portion of the army to reinstall Pahoran, fighting together against Pahoran's enemies. Pahoran and Moroni finally drive out the Lamanites from their last two holdouts, the cities of Nephihah and Moroni. What's curious is that all but two of these cities, Mulek and Omner, share names with Nephite leaders directly involved in the Amalekite War. Moroni, Morianton, Lehi, Gid, and Pahoran, the son of Nephihah, were directly involved in a conflict over cities they shared names with. In Pahoran's case, the city of Nephihah was his father's namesake. The Nephites named cities after the first men to possess them, implying that the Lamanites did not. From this, we can come to one of two possibilities. Either these men were the first set of men to possess these cities, or these men just happened to be named after the men who first possessed them. Rather than assuming there were two temporally distant sets of men with the same names, possessing then defending the same cities, appealing to Occam's razor, the first is most likely true. These cities were first possessed by Moroni, Morianton, Lehi, Gid, and Nephihah via conquest or as entirely new settlements. As for the city of Omner, it's possible that this city was founded by the same Omner in the book of Mosiah, a son of King Mosiah II, who disappears from the Mormon's narrative after he and his brothers returned from their mission to the Lamanites. If Omner was still alive during this time, then it would have been as an old man. If Moroni, Gid, Morianton, and Lehi are the rulers of the coastal outposts that they are fighting to defend, being subservient to the central political power at Zarahemla, then they were the Nephite equivalent of what the Maya would later call Sahal. According to David Stewart, the Sahal were subsidiary lords, basically elite court members who were not high rulers of kingdoms, many of whom seemed to rule as at secondary centers surrounding larger capitals. The Melakayite War was thus fought over territories on the Lamanite and Nephite peripheries. Either the Lamanites were seeking to reclaim lost land, or they were pushing back against what they perceived as Nephite encroachment. If the river Sidon was the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta River, then another possible reason to fight over these settlements was because they were founded along important trade routes which remained essentially the same between the pre-classic, when the war took place, and the classic, when Mormon was writing. Quote, the presence of obsidian from faraway sources at Maya lowland sites continued into the pre-classic period as well. At Colja in northern Belize, researchers found obsidian from San Martin Hilotepec. El Chayal, located near modern-day Guatemala City, and Ixtepeque, located approximately 85 kilometers southeast of the El Chayal outcrop. While El Chayal is the most dominant source at Colja, dependence on El Chayal increases as dependence on San Martin Hilotepeke decreases. David Brown et al. Noted that the increasing dependence on El Chayal coincides with the rise of the classic period site of Caminal Huyu, located adjacent to the El Chayal source. Researchers also noted that Ixtepeque, which is not commonly present at pre-classic sites, represented a larger than expected portion of the sample. However, Ixtepeque also had also been found at other late pre-classic sites, and the significant presence of Ixtepeque obsidian at the site could reflect increased trade relations with sites near the Motagua River Valley or along the coast. If trade of Ixtepeque obsidian followed Hammond's model in the pre-classic period. A wide variety of obsidian sources were also utilized at Aguateca and Cebal in the Petexpatun region of Guatemala. Kazuo Ayoama stated that the number of sources present at the site increases from the pre-classic to the classic period. In his sample of several thousand obsidian artifacts, only 20 pieces of obsidian were found in pre-classic contexts. These 20 pieces were visually sourced to reveal obsidian from San Martin Hilotepeke and El Chayal. The small sample size from the pre-classic period created difficulty when analyzing trends in reliance through time. Although the majority of the sample consistently originated from El Chayal, the trend does not follow with the idea that San Martin Hilotepeke obsidian was the most heavily used during the pre-classic period, which could suggest a more focused trade relationship with sites adjacent to the El Chayal source rather than the San Martin Hilotepeke source, although the two sources are relatively close together. The classic period. At Tikal in northern Guatemala, 2,235 pieces of obsidian were sourced. Most of the obsidian appeared to come from the Guatemalan highland sources of El Chayal and Ixtepeque, precisely as Hammond's model would predict. The northeast Petén and southern Belize are two areas in which the distribution of the Ixtepeque and El Chayal obsidian overlap. However, there was also obsidian from another Guatemalan highland source, San Martin Hilotepeke, as well as numerous sources in central Mexico, including Pachuca, which made up 29.5% of the 1984 study sample, and Usareo, The additional sources suggested another possible inland trade route to the lowland sites from central Mexico. End of very long quote. The Lamanites would have every reason to see Nephite settlements as a land grab, as the coastal land along the sea east / Gulf of Honduras was strategically important. Compared to walking on foot, using canoes along inland and coastal waterways made travel less laborious for traders. The war was one in which Moroni, Gid, Morianton, and Lehi were fighting for their own settlements with the backing of two very sympathetic chief judges, Nephihah and Pahoran. Like the Nephite captains directly involved in fighting, Nephihah would have been the first man to possess the city of Nephihah, with Pahoran being his heir to both the judgment seat and his settlement. This is why, unlike with the other coastal cities, Pahoran goes to free the city of Nephihah himself. He was its lord. The war over these peripheral settlements was draining the relatively peaceful interior of valuable resources. The kingmen, as elites from in or around Zarahemla, would have been among those that provided such resources, even if their own holdings in the interior were not in immediate danger. Such a situation would have been the fuel of resentment needed for Pacas's coup. Hill's 1917 identification of the River Sidon as the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta, the region's central tributary, also elucidates and rationalizes a sequence of assassinations and invasions in the Book of Helaman. From 52 to 50 BC, Pahoran was chosen by the voice of the people. A faction which supported his brother Pankai assassinates Pahoran II and becomes known as the Gadianton robbers. His other brother, Pacumeni, is chosen by the voice of the people to become chief judge. Pacumeni is not targeted by the Gadianton robbers. Rather, Coriantumr, a descendant of Muluk, the founder of a previous dynasty, leads an army of Lamanites and takes over Zarahemla, killing Pacumeni himself. Coriantumr takes over Zarahemla, but is killed when his army tries to take Bountiful. The remainder of Coriantumr's army retreats back to Lamanite territory. But why? Between 50 and 49 BC, Helaman II, a grandson of Alma II, is chosen by the voice of the people and survives an assassination attempt by the Gadianton robbers. He doesn't deal with Lamanite invasion. But why? 39 BC, Nephi II becomes chief judge after his father Helaman dies, but he is not described as being chosen by the voice of the people. Rather, he reigns in his stead. Gadianton robbers make no attempt on his life. From 38 to 30 BC, during the reign of Nephi II, unnamed Nephite dissenters lead a Lamanite advance and take over Zarahemla and other Nephite lands up to the land Bountiful. The Nephites then regain only half of the Nephite lands below the narrow neck of land. In 30 BC, having lost half of the Nephite lands, Nephi II delivers the judgment seat to Zezoram, another chief judge not described as having been chosen by the voice of the people. This is where Mormon comments that their governments were established by the voice of the people, and they who chose evil were more numerous than they chose good. Therefore, they were ripening for destruction, for the laws had become corrupted. That makes you wonder if Nephi II had a shady political past before he became prophet. Maybe. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? 30 BC, the Lamanites became converted and yield up unto the Nephites the land of their possession. Despite this, Lamanites still enter these lands and the land northward with exceedingly great power and authority, preaching religion to the people. Trade and intercourse exist between Lamanites and Nephites. This is interesting because in antiquity there is no separation between cult and king. Religious power is political power, and vice versa. In 24 BC, Caesarum is assassinated. His unnamed son succeeds him and is also assassinated. The Gadiantian robbers usurp control of the government and have one of their own in the judgment seat, Caesarum, who is then killed by his brother. The Book of Helaman's cycle of assassination and invasion, not seen anywhere else in the Book of Mormon, thus looks something like this. In the chart above, marked with the asterisks, are attempted assassinations and a case of fratricide. Notice that it's always an assassination or an invasion, but no Nephite chief judge ever has to deal with both an invasion and an assassination. If Pahoran II, Helaman II, Caesarum, and his unnamed successor controlled trade along the Rio Pasión tributary in ways which were perceived by locals as being against the interests of Nephite elites, then the Gadiantian robbers would have ample motive for killing them. If Pacumeni and Nephite II managed the tributary in ways that were perceived by Lamanites elites as being against their interests, then they would have ample reason to militarily back any Nephite seeking to take over and manage the tributary in a way more aligned with Lamanite interests. The Gadiantian robbers, seeking power and wealth above all else, finally came into power, but were not attacked by the Lamanites because, as rulers, they could manage the tributary in ways suitable to the Lamanites, while still being at the top of the social pyramid. It was a win-win situation for them. This might also explain why they felt the need to kill Nephite II via kangaroo court, as opposed to a straightforward assassination. As chief judge, Nephite II seems to have managed the affairs of the government in ways that were perceived as paralleling the interests of the Gadiantian robbers and other high elites, hence the Lamanite invasion and the lack of assassination. Nephite II was popular among the believers and perhaps a subset of the Gadiantian robbers. They had to get rid of him legitimately through the courts. Finally, like Elijah the Tishbite, Nephite II sealed up the heavens, causing a drought. The drought caused great suffering, which brought about a great repentance among many of the people. Jim Hawker has written an excellent paper showing that the convergence between the famine mentioned in the Book of Helaman and the same kind of event happening in Mesoamerica for the exact same time period. So check that out. Without a Nahum/Nahum type of discovery in Mesoamerica, it may be impossible to positively identify the river Sidon as being the Grijalva or the Usumacinta rivers. However, it may be time to revisit the possibilities that await along the Usumacinta. Taking the Usumacinta as the river Sidon with the reference to 4 cardinal seas as being 4 actual seas has several advantages. The first limited geography model for the Book of Mormon, which set the Nephite history entirely in Mesoamerica, was that of Edward Lawrence Hill, a member of the RLDS in 1917. Though many of the specifics in his model were certainly wrong, Hill identified the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta River as the River Sidon and the Gulf of Honduras as the East Sea. It was also the first model to identify the narrow neck of land with the Strait of Tehuantepec. This is significant because these identifications were made decades before radiocarbon dating was invented in the 1940s. Using the above 3 identifications as pegs for an external model for Book of Mormon geography protects us from the risk of subconsciously shoehorning the Book of Mormon into a specific region based on our current knowledge of Mesoamerican archaeology, such that we radically redefine the 4 cardinal points in a part of the world where the east and west were universally identified with the rising and setting sun. Hill's model is essentially a prediction based on another prediction, made without knowledge of Olmec or Mayan archaeological chronologies, because they hadn't been discovered yet. In this paper, we can see that 2 of the 3 main predictions, Usumacinta equals Sidon, and the Gulf of Honduras is the East Sea, converge with modern archaeology and have explanatory powers in ways which have gone unnoticed by Book of Mormon scholars for too long. Thank you.